I am bringing on my video because it helps to have video. Hello there. This is Tara Clark for another installment of Modern Mom Probs Live. Today I am joined by Katie Kripke. She is an author. She is a mental health counselor. She has a new book coming out. It is called Reinventing Supermom: Support and Strategies for New Moms Who Feel Lost. And today we're going to be talking about the postpartum transition, what postpartum means, what new moms can look for, and how we can get support from our families. I'm going to bring Katie on right now, and we're going to invite her to video, and we should be good in about 2 seconds. How's everyone doing? Hi, Kate. How are you?
I'm good. I am feeling a little technologically unadvanced in this moment. So thank you for bearing with me and trying to figure out how to get on here.
No, you were perfect. Literally all I have to do is find you, and then I bring you onto the stage, and ta-da, here we are.
So perfect. It's perfect.
Great. It works out well. Kate, I'm so glad that you could join us today. As I was just mentioning as we got on, you are a mental health counselor. You authored a new book. I want to hear all about those things. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. So I am a licensed clinical social worker. I'm located in Boulder, Colorado, and I founded a maternal and early family mental health clinic here in Boulder that services lots of families across the state of Colorado. And really my biggest passion and focus is working towards what sort of the key word is maternal mental health and wellness, and really helping moms from that early stages, the first stages of motherhood, right? Like even sometimes preconception all the way through however old your kids are going to be, really helping moms to understand the importance of mental health and wellness in the parenting of their kids, right? We get lost in that. We take such good care of our kids, and then suddenly we start to feel like we're not getting what we need. So that's my shtick.
I love it. And that is so important to me. Everything I do at Modern Mom Probs is obviously for moms, and maternal mental health is a huge part of that. So I want to talk about the postpartum transition. What do we mean when we say the word postpartum?
Yeah, such a good question. So postpartum is the time frame from birth through the first 12 months of that baby's life. So it's this big chunk of time. And we sort of tend to think postpartum is just like right after birth. Oh, I'm postpartum.
Yeah. Like so many times I think that it's like the first 4 weeks or so, but it's so much more than that.
That's right. It's so much more than that. So yeah, 12 months after birth, that's that postpartum period.
Wow. So I'm going to just jump right into it because I'm all about just jumping right into things.
Great.
What does and I'm using this in quotes, normal postpartum adjustment look like? What does an adjustment disorder look like? Walk me through what may be typical and maybe atypical.
Yep. So every new mom is going to have plenty of moments of discomfort and overwhelm, right? So it is totally normal for a mom to feel like they are kind of, more tearful than usual, a little more overwhelmed and anxious than usual, probably more irritable and uncertain than usual. But we actually, so I think if we back up, what is normal? It's normal to have plenty of moments of that. But it's also normal to be able to feel joy, right? And to be able to feel connection and to be able to have perspective so that we can sort of understand that, oh, my baby's crying. This feels really awful right now. And my baby will stop crying and I'll feel better when everything sort of gets back to sort of baseline, right? But I think what we find in those moms that are really struggling with something that might be a little more critical or clinical is that those moms have a real hard time managing their nervous systems during those times of stress. So it's absolutely normal to feel the stress, to feel the impact of that stress, of course, but we also want those moms to be able to manage their nervous system, ask for and receive help, kind of think in bigger perspectives so that they can move through those moments of challenge without getting stuck, right? Yeah. Motherhood is inherently stressful. It's inherently overwhelming. So normal to feel the impacts of that, but we don't want someone to get stuck in those feelings of real challenge and struggle.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know when my son was born, he's almost 10 now. So, I'm talking a little while back. But when he was born, I suffered from postpartum anxiety. And I didn't know if that was just what motherhood was now. I just thought like, am I just supposed to be worried about every single little thing every time all day long? Like, is that what my whole rest of my life is going to be like now? Is that what motherhood is? And the answer to that question was no, not necessarily. Right. No.
Right. Yeah. I think that's part of those things, the things that we lose, right? Is that sort of sense of perspective, right? Like what actually should I expect as far as the long-term game of motherhood, right? Sometimes it does feel like a game, doesn't it? Where we're like trying to catch up, right? But I think you make a really important point, which is that many, many moms postpartum feel anxious and not depressed, right? That overwhelming feeling of anxiety, like, oh my gosh, am I going to feel this forever? That angst, that hard time sleeping, we're up at night worrying, the kind of, especially in the beginning where we tend to sort of need a lot of reassurance that our babies and our kids are okay, right? And the truth is that, again, I want to sort of both normalize and also encourage support, which is, of course, it's normal to feel anxious. And we do expect that anxiety to move so that we don't get overly consumed in it. What happens when we get overly consumed is we can't engage in our lives outside of that anxiety the way that we want to, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Because at that point, especially in that newborn time period, it is all consuming. Having a newborn is all consuming. And then the thoughts surrounding that is all consuming, whether it's breastfeeding or formula feeding or any kind of feeding. And all of those things is just, it's so many more things to worry about than I think that I was anticipating going into it once I had my son.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so curious, just sort of to get in that. What do you think you were anticipating? Right? Because I think that's part of the challenge is that we have all these expectations and then we're like, wait a second, this is not what I was expecting. Right?
I agree 100%. And I'm always a big fan. I always tell people like, manage your expectations. I always say that all the time. I think what really got me when my son was a newborn was the feedings. Breastfeeding was harder than I thought it was going to be. So then that therefore became stressful. And then I was pumping in order to be able to like see how much milk was in the bottle to quantify that, to make sure that he was eating enough because I didn't trust that he was eating enough otherwise. So like that was an anxiety, the sleeping, all of those things that like, newborns aren't going to sleep and they're going to cry and be fussy, but it was the things like I said, like feeding or are the bottles clean? It started like, did I wash that bottle enough? Is that bottle dirty? Is it going to, then it's like OCD thoughts that are going into that. Like maybe if that bottle's dirty, then he's going to get sick. All of those things were not part of the expectations that I thought they were going to be when I set out and had my son.
Right. And I think, unfortunately, people don't talk about that part enough, right? Which is why I love that you're doing podcasts like this because, it's interesting. You're sort of, I don't know your entire postpartum history, of course, but you're sort of moving into this place where as a clinician or as a coach and consultant, I start to get curious, right? So you said those OCD thoughts, right? And I don't know if you know this, but 10% of new moms in that postpartum period are going to struggle with what we consider to be postpartum OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And one of the telltale symptoms of that is like really scary, intrusive thoughts of harm that a mom thinks about over and over and over again that she can't sort of manage or quote unquote get rid of. So, and even with reassurance, right? So this may or may not have been your situation, but in our office, I see often that shows up around feeding and bottle cleaning and feeding is like, well, what if I didn't clean it enough? And then the image of something really bad happening because we didn't clean the bottle enough. And it's interesting how our brains, when they're depleted and sort of less healthy and resilient than we want them to be, they can get hooked right on those really scary thoughts. And I think that's a great example because postpartum OCD or anxiety that includes those intrusive thoughts, it's like we can't turn them off.
You can't shut them off. Yeah.
So much space, right?
Yeah, they really do. So what happens when you have a patient that comes in and says, like, I'm having these thoughts, I can't shut them off. They're not thoughts that I had, pre-baby. I'm having them now post-baby, postpartum. Then what?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I always do is normalize, because I want mothers to know how common these challenges are. So 1 in 5 moms, it's probably higher than that because we're only counting those people who raise their hands, right? But 1 in 5 moms is going to struggle with like those clinical levels of depression and anxiety sometime in that first year postpartum. So I really always want to start with like, this is not uncommon. I think things like the postpartum anxiety and OCD are really interesting because there is so little that we can control in early motherhood. And if we have not developed the skills through our lives to learn how to sit with unpredictability and uncertainty and lack of control, our brains will treat those moments as threat and danger, right? And that's when those kind of scary thoughts and symptoms start to perk up. And so I think one of the things that we get to do is give voice, whether it's in a therapist or coach office or with a friend or wherever it is, to give voice to all those things that we recognize we can't control, that we feel fearful of. And, that's that name it to tame it piece, right? Sometimes just giving voice to it gets the need to control those things out of our brain. And those kind of more compulsive behaviors like bottle washing, that's our attempt to control our environment, right? That's what we're trying to do.
Right.
So I think there's a way to sort of begin the conversation of talking about it. And then, of course, I'm such an advocate for brain health. And we don't think about that all the time as humans, right? And that's like sleep and nutrition and exercise or movement and breath and mindfulness practice and hydration and, social support or connection and nature and play. That's actually the 8 things we know that our brains need to function and be healthy. Most new moms aren't getting those things, especially right away.
I mean, you might be only getting half of those.
If that, right?
If that. If I think back, I probably might have only been getting maybe 2 of those.
That's right. That's right. And so I think when we begin to really coach moms to figure out how do I get more of those little things that are going to be helpful for my brain, and baby steps, not big. I mean, we don't need these big quantities, but baby steps. When we start feeding our brains and getting our brains healthier, our brains function the way we need them to, and we're less likely to get stuck in that thinking, right? Or to have that anxiety or that sort of depression where we feel low all the time. So I think a lot of us as moms, we have these babies, we take such good care of ourselves for 9 months plus, and we have these babies and all of our focus goes to the babies. And then we get depleted and our brains don't function very well, which is, makes sense, right?
It's true. I never really thought of it like that, in the way of like, we were taking such great care of ourselves for 9 months. And then all of a sudden, the birthday happens and then we sort of just fall off because it's not obviously about us anymore, right? It's about the baby. So I think that's a really important topic to talk about within postpartum conversation. Because we're eating right and we're trying to sleep. It's hard sleeping in the 3rd trimester, but we're trying to eat right and we're trying to sleep and we're trying to exercise and walk and do all of those things. And then it sort of is, the rug is sort of like pulled out from underneath us once we have the baby to do all of those other things. Obviously sleeping, sort of goes away until the baby's on a more regular track. And then even exercising. So like, what are some ways that new moms can sort of get back on track with those baby steps, like you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to help moms really understand that when they are taking care of themselves, they are actively taking care of their babies, right? That what babies need most is for moms to be healthy. And there's this weird thing where we're like, oh, but it's so selfish. I feel selfish having these needs of my own and taking time away. And we really want to shift that conversation so that we understand that time we give back to ourselves, the filling up of ourselves, is in service of our kids. So I think for first and foremost, we need to shift the sort of the mindset around that to make space for it. The next thing I just always say to folks, I often talk about these 8 things I just described as sort of a non-pharmaceutical prescription, right? Like if you want to feel well and you're beginning to not feel well, you got to take doctor's orders, right? You got to take the medicine. And those 8 things are like medicine for our brain. And we start small. What is the minimum amount we need to feel mentally well enough? So if we go to like exercise and movement, which we have so much data and so much research about the role of movement and exercise in prevention of depression and anxiety, for a new mom, it might mean a walk around the block. Right? Breath and mindfulness. We have so much research on how mindfulness and learning how to breathe is important for our brain health. That might look like 3 deep breaths first thing in the morning. So these things can be tiny and bite-sized. And we start there. I just saw you take a deep breath, right? It's like,
I'm going to practice what you're preaching. Yeah.
And sometimes we forget. We think we need to be doing these big, huge things. And then we're like, I have a new mom. I'm a new mom. I don't have time for that. And it's like, oh no, we want to like get really bite-sized and do those things as often as we can throughout the day. Right.
Yeah, I love that. I want to switch and shift over a bit to talk about postpartum depression. Obviously, we covered anxiety, but I think it's really important to speak about postpartum depression. What do you say to moms who are truly struggling with that right now, and they just feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, it's not that different than the way we were just talking about postpartum anxiety, right? And often that they're overlapped, right? Often moms who are struggling with postpartum depression also feel a lot of anxiety. But the point you're making, I think, is that when we're in it, we can't see past it, right? It's like our whole perspective ends. And again, I think it's sort of that what our brains do when we're stuck in those symptom pictures like that are so problematic, because we lose hope and we lose motivation and we lose perspective. And sometimes, honestly, it really does just take the reminding for those moms that they are okay and that they're not all on their own, that there are bazillion women all over the world who are having the exact same experience they are and who have had that experience and have moved through. And then we just start small. Again, I think if it's a mom who's really struggling with postpartum depression and anxiety, we have to meet her where she is. We can't expect her to suddenly start getting exercise every day and suddenly eating 3 healthy meals, right? So we just start small. I have this sort of image that I use. It comes from a type of depression treatment called behavioral activation. And it's an image I use with folks in my office, like a staircase, right? A staircase going up and then a staircase going down. When we're depressed, we like get in a ball and we roll down the staircase, right? We're just like easiest possible thing. And those choices might be like, I'm going to stay on the couch. I'm not going to eat today. I'm not going to get out of bed, right? Whatever that thing is. And we want to create an upward staircase to move towards health and wellness. And each step is one small thing, right? Remind myself that I'm doing the best I can. Might be one step on the staircase. Drink some water might be another step, right? Take a deep breath might be another step, right? Step outside for a moment. And what we know about depression is that it's a cycle. Once we get started in those choices that help us feel better, we can move up in that direction. And it's just, rather than looking all the way at the end, we just want to do one step at a time. I think we find that when we start that pattern of making choices and really choices, the only 2 places humans have control are our own thoughts and our own choices. That's it. Right. Yeah. And I think when most moms who are depressed and anxious feel like they have no control, there's no agency. So an exercise like that, where we start just taking baby steps upward, begins to remind us that we can make choices that help us feel good. And by recognizing that we have capacity over to make our own choices, we build that sense of control. And that will often open up space from that darker place. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I want to talk about your new book,
Thank you.
right? Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about it. Reinventing Supermom. So who is this supermom? What is your supermom concept that we are now deconstructing?
Right. Well, I think super mom for most of us in our heads is that mother who's getting shit done all the time, taking care of everybody, tireless, doesn't need any help, has totally got
Mhm.
this. And when I say reinventing super mom, I really want us as mothers to begin to understand that being strong and being powerful and being competent requires us to allow ourselves to not be perfect, to allow ourselves to be messy, to actually be willing to be vulnerable enough to say, I probably can do all of this on my own, but there's going to be a consequence, and I don't want to because I want to be healthy and well for my kids. So I'm really wanting to, again, it's this conversation of like, how are we talking about good mothering? And if we don't allow the definition of good mothering to include caring for ourselves, taking breaks, right? Allowing
Mhm.
ourselves to make mistakes and repair, talking to ourselves kindly. If we don't allow that as part of the definition, we can't show up as a good mom. I don't know about you, but when I'm like irritable and tired and depleted, I lose my patience and then I feel bad about there's not good
Yeah.
mom moves in that moment,
No,
right?
no, it's not, because then you're dysregulated and the children are dysregulated, and it does not end well. It's not a pretty scene.
And that's that word dysregulation is such a good and important word because moms and kids' nervous systems are interconnected. So if we are dysregulated, our kids will automatically feed off of us for that. If we are grounded and if we have the capacity to ground ourselves and we can show up as solid and tolerant of discomfort and able to kind of care for ourselves and be a little more, we don't have to be perfect, but a little more sort of in that rational brain place, our kids will also experience that. So it really, that co-regulation, right? It's so important to understand that connection with moms and kids.
It's so important. You just actually made me think of going back to the postpartum part about regulation with spouses or partners. We didn't talk about the postpartum and the partner. I really want to talk about that. We have like 5 minutes left, but I think it's so important to talk about
Yeah,
because,
so tell me which part of that are you interested in?
oh, gosh, all of it. No, because I think it's really important. There's so many different things that once a baby comes into a family, the mother and I'm just going to use like a hetero scenario with this one, like a mother and a father, like it changes their dynamic.
Yep.
And even a mother, if she's experiencing postpartum depression, obviously that changes the dynamic. So I want to talk a little bit about, gosh, like I said, this could be a whole nother conversation for another 30 minutes, but I want to talk about partners helping out in the postpartum time frame.
Yeah, I mean, so, oh gosh, I don't even know where to begin because there's so much.
I know.
Okay, so
It's so
let's
much.
back up and let's remind your listeners that, well, here's sort of a thing to know. When we as humans are in places of connection with other people, ourselves and our environment, right? Our parasympathetic nervous system turns on. That's rest and digest. We feel calm, we feel safe, we feel grounded. When we're in periods of disconnection with ourselves, other people, like our partners or the environment, our sympathetic nervous system turns on. That's fight, flight, or freeze. And there is a disconnect. There's an inevitable disconnection that's going to happen in that early postpartum period, right? Because we can know our spouses or our partners so well as individuals, we do not know them as parents yet. We don't even know ourselves as parents yet, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so inherent in this time frame is disconnection. And I think one of the things that we miss in that prenatal prep period is conversations with our partners about our hopes, our fears, and our expectations, right? Because we go in with all these assumptions and we want to be mind read and we think, and then all hell breaks loose. And it does for every couple. I want to normalize that as well, right? When there's tension in that early stage postpartum after a baby's born, it does not mean your partnership is destined to fail. It's like, this is hard. And in fact, we know that first year after having a baby is statistically the hardest in a relationship, right? So there's all this rumbling. And I think what we tend to do, because we're more depleted than we might be if we didn't have a new baby, is we react to those feelings, right? And then it's just this big, huge, giant storm. I wish that every new a family that was becoming parents had individual and couples therapy support, not because they're sick and broken and need to be sort of cured of something, but because we don't know how to do this yet.
It's so new.
We don't know how to do it. So I think there's a way in which really kind of understanding and normalizing and making space for, again, I sort of feel like I'm repeating myself here, but the discomfort that inevitably comes, so that we don't assume problem, like if there's a misunderstanding or a frustration or a disappointment, that we don't go quickly to, oh my gosh, this is a problem. That we can kind of soften around that, so that really underneath that, both parents are like, I don't know what I'm doing, right? Both parents are scared and uncertain and feel out of control. So we want to help, co-parents connect underneath where there's that shared experience versus up here where we're trying to battle who's right and who's wrong. And right? Does that,
Totally.
That's the tip of the iceberg, but do you know what I mean?
I know. I realized, I was like, how could that possibly be my last question, where we could have went on about that for like another hour, talking about spouses and relationships and the dynamic of introducing a new family member. So yeah, that was on me. Kate, tell everyone where we can find you online and where we could buy your book.
That's great. My book is almost in my hand. It will be here any day, but you can get Reinventing Supermom on Amazon or from my website. My website is katekripke.com. No one ever knows how to spell that last name, but it's katekripke.com. I put a lot of kind of free content and important information out there to folks on my Instagram feed, which is at Kate Kripke. And really, I use that feed to sort of share little snippets of ideas of how people can really navigate this journey and also lean back into themselves to gain health and wellness. And so that's where folks can find me, those places.
I love it. I think this was such a fantastic conversation. You came with so many wonderful strategies that helps me just think. Obviously, like I said, I'm 10 years out from the postpartum transition there, but I think that's so helpful for friends of mine who are having babies now and just people I know within my own community. So I appreciate that so much. So Kate, thank you so much for being here. It's exactly 9:00 and we kept it exactly for 30 minutes, although I could have went on for another hour about dynamics with partners. But Kate, thank you so much for being here.
Honored to be here, and it never ends. Postpartum, on to the rest of our lives as mothers, right?